Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so excited about today's episode because there's something we're going to be talking about that in over 1,100 episodes, we've somehow never discussed. And it's funny because it's something that we all face in our own businesses. And that's because today's guest, one thing that I saw in his messaging is that he helps businesses focus on the right audience and avoid time wasters, which none of us want those types of people. So today's guest is going to knock our socks off and give us so many cool insights into all the great work that he's up to. So let me introduce you to him. His name is Calvron Wachter. Calvron is a specialist in targeted lead generation. His company helps businesses identify and connect with their ideal customers, transforming prospects into loyal clients. That is something we are all tasked with in our businesses. With backgrounds in business development and data analytics, he's developed strategies that enable small companies to scale efficiently by focusing on that little teaser that I had at the top of this episode, which is focusing on the right audience while avoiding time wasters. I'm super excited about this one, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Calvron Wachter. All right, Calvron, I am so excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, no, so I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of TV shows in my day, and everyone's like, wow, I'm blown away by the introduction. Like, this is, when you introduced me, I was blown away. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Heck yeah. I'll tell you this. If I ever stop doing this podcast, I'm just going to charge people to introduce them at networking events. I get that all the time, Calvron. But what I want you to do, since I gave you that intro, is take us beyond the bio. Tell listeners, who's Calvron? How'd you start doing all this cool work?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So, I mean, growing up, I've always been in love with data, with analytics, with making spreadsheets. You know, when I was growing up, I would play fantasy football with my friends. And, back then, I didn't know what Excel was. So when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I had pencil, I had paper, I had a calculator, and I would calculate just expected points per game, expected wins. Then as I got older in college, I started doing that on a larger scale. Once I knew what Excel was and I learned what more databases were. Then in my first job, one of my bosses had an idea, and I was like, this would take way too long for us to do manually. So I made, a 10,000 entry database. Then I was able to do it by state, by location. And the next thing I know, I was in charge of lead generation for my first company that I was working at. And then the second one I was in, I was also in charge of lead generation. And then I had a thought of, why can't I do this on my own? If I can do this for one company, I can do it for two. I can do it for three. And then I started scaling along those lines. And, I love what I do.
Yeah, I love that, especially because I know that you and I are both soccer fans. So sounds like you were early to the XG train, which has become all the rage in the soccer analytics world these days. But Calvron, I want to ask you about this because a lot of people, when they think about lead generation, they don't think about data supporting them. A lot of business owners, way too many business owners, lead generation is just something that happens by chance. And they go to networking events and they meet people and they collect business cards. They're not very organized when it comes to lead generation. You obviously have a much more data intensive approach to it. What is lead generation? What do you see that's way too common for business owners? And then what's your approach to lead gen?
Sure. So one of my favorite sayings that I have, right, is that data does not tell you what you want, but it tells you what you don't want. For example, in one of the companies that I was working for, I was in charge of choosing what regions we wanted to work in. So my biggest word is density. What I mean by density is density of location, density of opportunity. For example, I was telling a company last month that when you want to build density, where do you want to work? Where do you want to build that base? When I was choosing what college I wanted to go to when I was growing up, my uncle had really great advice. I was between 3 different schools, and he said, where could you see yourself living for the rest of your life, right? And so that's why I ended up choosing a university in Nashville. Because I thought that I would want to live in Nashville as opposed to other areas. Same thing applies for data. Where do you want to have a base? Where do you want to build and grow your foundation at, right? And so that's what I tell every business that I work with is, all right, what are your 3 goals? Where do you want to build? Why do you want to build it? And what's your end goal, right? And so with data, at the last company I was working for before I started my own, is I would be in charge of choosing which markets we wanted to go into. I would choose, let's say there's 100 possible markets for certain fields. You choose the data that you want, you choose whichever things you think are best, And then I go in, I plug in all the numbers, and then I'll present the top 5, 10, 15 regions. And then I can explain why backed with data. Right? I mean, it's just something I've been doing for years. And I think that's the biggest thing for business owners is the where and the why.
Yeah, so well said. Two very important questions that a lot of people don't ask in their own businesses. What I really appreciate about your business and the way that you run it, Calvron, is the fact that you not only do that analysis, you not only give people that clarity and that guidance on it, but I love the fact that you also enjoy executing. You also love providing those services to people. What does that look like? A lot of people have never worked with a growth company like yours, and they're probably thinking, Calvron, how are you going to walk into my business and connect with leads and help me do exactly that? What's that look like?
Yeah, it's great. So one of the things that I talk about a lot that I love doing is communicating, is being able to take a message and also verbalizing and explaining why something matters or what you can do with it, right? So I actually have 2 years of experience working in the business development world, where not only would I be doing the data infrastructure, I would also be going to doctors, talking to surgeons, talking to people outside of healthcare. One of the things I tell people is that, so my core functionality, what I've done previously is in healthcare. But in the last few months, I've been working for a garbage truck company. I've been working for real estate companies to where I can put myself in the position of the developer or the person who's trying to do that business. I can make the spreadsheets, I can make the data, I can make the suggestions, but then I can either go on behalf of the company or I can tell the developer or someone in charge what they should be doing to make those sales happen. So it's, in the past, I've talked about how I've been a full-scale provider. What that means is I can source the data, I can make the data understandable and actionable, and I can also, if I need to, go through and do the work for that company to help them grow, or it can, be a one-stop shop, or I can be the development branch with my team. It's not just me, it's others who are beneath me that I have them do work, because I can't do everything at once, but I'm able to use my experience, my skill set, and my skills to make those things happen.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you talk about that. I'll tell you this, in the marketing world, I've always loved that phrase of full stack, a marketer that can help us in all the different ways. And with your company, I love how much of your messaging talks about being a full service growth company, because those are the ingredients that are needed for all of us. What I'm hearing though, when I hear you talk about the implementation, is a much more proactive approach to lead generation and going after the business than what most business owners and entrepreneurs do. Because why? We've got a million other things on our plate. And we're not just doing lead gen. We are also selling. We are also fulfilling our clients' projects. We are also doing the accounting and finance and projections and strategic planning, all of these things. What does that proactivity look like for people who have never had the time or the resources to be proactive when it comes to their lead gen? What does it actually look like for you guys to do the work?
Exactly. So there's passive and there's active growth. One of the things that would, I had great times in my previous companies, but that would drive me crazy is I would have an idea, I would have a project, I would have contacts, I would have leads, and then they would sit on the shelf for a month, 2 months, 3 months. And that's what hard is because everyone has so many things going on. You can't choose. That was actually my issue the first few months of me starting my company was I was trying to do 6, 7 things at once. And what I realized you really have to do is you have to choose 1 or 2 things and go at it, and then go to step 3, then go to step 4. And so for me, my biggest focus has shifted from trying to do all the things at once, but to focusing on the one thing that, in my opinion, my company is one of the best at, which is focusing on targeted lead generation. I'll give an example. One of my partners is currently in the real estate industry, and we have a very precise set of metrics that we want to chase after, our KPIs, and we have certain goals, right? So what that means is that my team, so for them, we're doing email outreach. And so once we choose a certain market and we make the emails seem like they're individualized towards that target, I'll have my engineers go through and find emails based on contacts that I develop. And one of the great things is that in the last market we were at over an 80% open percentage and a 20% reply percentage because our messaging was so direct. And then once that happened, the professionals inside of that company, they would go through and then they would start talking to the future clients, right? And so the biggest thing for me is that when you choose a region, you get familiarity, and then you get repetition. And then once you're in there, you're able to grow a market organically. Because sure, it can be hard at first when you're trying to outreach in a market, But once you have a common 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, clients, then it'll start building organically by word of mouth and by how you go in that market.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot here for listeners because I think it's really important. I think it's important for us to talk about this because it's a term that we throw around so much. ICP, the ideal customer profile. And we've all heard it on business podcasts and in YouTube videos and in business books. And I remember 10 years ago, I used to obsess with like the generic advice that everyone used to give of like, you need to know what car they drive. You need to know what music they listen to. And I remember I would sit down in my business and go, okay, if they drive Toyota Camrys, what does that do? How do I get in front of them? It wasn't really helpful to me there. I know, and you even said it, you said targeted lead generation. So obviously that targeting is the first part of that phrase. What does that ideal customer profile look like to you? When you help people get clarity on that, what's the level that you go to? And most importantly, what do you actually care about so you can take action on it?
So that's a great question. And I can give my least favorite answer of all time, which is it depends, right? Based on which client you're working with, based on which industry, based on your goals. So one of the things you always want to avoid is it's a simple phrase, paralysis by analysis. I'm sure everyone's heard it. And what that means in this situation is that sometimes you're too focused on the perfect client that you're missing out on your ideal client. And so what that means is that you want to choose vague, but not too vague of demographics. Then once you have those set criteria, all right, you have a bucket. Instead of focusing on the top 5% of a market or the top 15% of the market, go for the top 30%, go for the top 35%. Because as you start digging, eventually you'll find gold. And then that's when you want to start looking at those areas more.
Yeah, that's such an important consideration. I'm grateful for you taking our audience there. What I also think about a lot is how far along these people are in their buying process. And so I think about, for example, a garbage company. You put that in the conversation. Let's roll with that as an example. If I own a garbage company, well, quite frankly, I want to get in front of everybody in a given neighborhood. And that's my consideration. Whereas if I'm selling social media services, I could get in front of every single business owner in the world, or I could say, how the heck do I find business owners who are actively looking for social media agencies? So obviously there's different levels of awareness in the marketplace. How much do you consider that, and how do you turn that into actionable insights so you can actually target those specific people?
Sure. So what I would call is in that situation, you want to use what you call deal breakers. So when I was talking to my client in the garbage, in the garbage truck company, is essentially I said, all right, Jim, which characteristics do you not want in a client? Which characteristics do you not want in a customer? So he gave me deal breakers. And so like I said before, data doesn't always tell you what you want. It tells you what you don't want, right? And so, let's say there's certain zip codes within a county or there's certain counties within a state. I was able to tell my client which areas he does not want to go into, what zip codes are not ideal targets. And so then once we knocked off the bottom 40, 50%, we had actionable insights on that last 50%. And then we sat down and broke it down to where then he could start doing advertising, going to those neighborhoods and talking to people in those neighborhoods, because then he'll know these are the ones where we have a chance for success as opposed to ones where he would have no chance. And once again, the time waster aspect, right? It's about choosing what could work and knowing what does not work.
Ooh, I'll tell you what, in over 1,100 episodes, Calvin, I think you're the very first person who, within the context of your ideal customer, you've invited us to list out what we don't want as well. Truly, I think that's really important advice when it comes to our ideal customer. I immediately think of two things. One, when you talk about deal breakers, realtors lean on that a lot. They say, what do you not want in a house? People might say, I don't want too much yard because I don't want to mow the lawn all the time. I don't use it. And then I also think about Google ad campaigns. It's so interesting how similar your approach is to their logic, which obviously they know what they're doing, because their logic is tell us the keywords you want to target and equally tell us the keywords you don't want to target in people's search terms. So it's really cool hearing how you apply that in the work that you do. I want to ask you about those deal breakers, because a lot of people, this is the first time they may be hearing it. What are some more examples of those deal breakers that will help us to avoid the time wasters? Obviously, it's a big way I tease this episode, so I want to go deeper there.
Great. So let's all do that by breaking down different clients. So one of my clients was actually a pediatric dentist. So for any of those who don't know what that means, it's a dentist who works with exclusively children. So one of the things that we did was I found him information based on how many high schools in the area, how many middle schools, as well as the average age of each zip code, as well as the age trends from 5 years ago to now. And one more thing is also we included the median income of that zip code over with the 5-year growth in population growth of those zip codes. So based on information, we were able to knock out areas that did not have a high growth rate, that did not have a growing income rate over the last 5 years, as well as if the ratio of under 18-year-olds weren't high enough, then we also crossed those off. So then once we had the bottom 50% off, we sat down and had a conversation about the top 50%, and then based on all the information on there, we got to our top 30% targets, and then we started talking to those, right? And then once we were figuring out which areas were working, we then focused our time on the top 10% after we tried the top 30%.
Yeah, that is such a cool approach. Honestly, I'm really enjoying hearing the way you think through it. I know that simplicity is a core part of the way that you work with your clients because you love the data. We may not love the data as much, but your ability to make it simple is super important. I want to ask you about scale. It's something that in preparation for you and I getting together today, it's something that it's so clear. It's near and dear to your heart. It's at the core of what it is that you do. A lot of people use that word in different ways. I feel like it's definitely become a buzzword in entrepreneurial circles over the past few years is everyone wants to talk about scale. What does scale actually mean to you?
Sure. So one of the really great things I've had the pleasure of experiencing is that, so I was hired by 2 companies that were recently had private equity money going into them. What that means is that a very wealthy individual or individuals started pouring money into a company because eventually they want to try to sell it and make a profit. So what that means is they want to grow rapidly. And as the first hire at one company where I was, as part of that growth process, I was in a lot of meetings that I honestly had no business being in. But that's great because I was able to see different ideas. And then, I stayed for a few years so I could see what worked and what didn't work. And also I was able to work in those companies and make some of those tools that worked and also didn't work. So now that I'm doing my own thing, I'm able to use those insights that I had to focus on scaling the right way and also talking about things the right way. And being able to warn companies about the pitfalls of, we could do this, but this way might work better. Or I've seen this happen before and it was risky. How about this way? So really just the easy way to describe it is that I've seen a lot of great and a lot of poor. And so I'm able to help companies grow quickly. Also, with my digital skills, my analytics skills, my business skills, help them scale the way that they want to scale without wasting time.
Yeah, I think that contrast is so important. Too many people forget about that. They think that we only learn from the wins, we learn from the things that are working, but I love your appreciation for learning through the things that don't work as well. It's that contrast that illuminates the good stuff. I think that's super important. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about channels because you've already introduced us to, with one of your clients, you're working on emails, for example, and using that as an outreach mechanism. I can think of so many different ones, and we always get emails from listeners saying, should I be using social media? Should I be on LinkedIn? Should I be doing paid ads? Obviously, there's no one right answer. I'll lean on your answer from earlier. It totally depends. But with that in mind, I do want to ask you, what are some of those channels? Knowing that you use such a proactive approach, what are some of the channels that you lean on and really enjoy for lead gen?
So really it depends, right? So let's say for my for the garbage company, their LinkedIn's not going to work, right? At that point, it's B2C, business to customer. So in that part, it is marketing, right? So let's say, for example, on certain marketing sites, or even let's say, so the easiest one of all, Facebook. You can choose zip codes. You can choose keywords that you want to go after, right? So it really just depends on the client, but there's a wide variety. You could make a podcast. You could start doing conferencing. You could try to make conferences with other business members. You could with CEOs, with clients. But you could do emailing, right? But the most important thing of all is that you make the customer feel comfortable, because no one's going to respond if they feel uncomfortable with something, right? So you have to sit and ask yourself critically, what situation do I need to put my future client, my future customer in to make him or her feel comfortable and confident that they can make a decision that what's best for them without feeling pressured. Maybe it's email, maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's advertising, maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's making a podcast and playing the long game. I can't stress enough how important it is to adapt to your customer and their environment, and that's what makes them comfortable. So unfortunately, Brian, the easy answer is there is no easy answer.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, the fact that you gave a very big shout out to the world of podcasting, I'm super appreciative about that. But like you said, you emphasized every platform has a different time frame. Podcasting is not a very quick solution. Take it from someone who's been doing it for almost a decade and over 1,100 episodes. So yeah, understanding the goals, understanding your customers, really cool to hear in real time the way that you think about these things. I also want to ask you, when we think about all these different platforms and things that we could choose, obviously the back end of it is what supports and understanding the metrics and the data that comes back. Now, I'm guessing that's where you really love getting your hands on all that data and all that feedback. What are the things that you look for? Because a lot of businesses make efforts in all these different channels and all these different campaigns, but what are the metrics that you pay attention to?
Great. So the most important thing for me in this is, first, you got to have preparation. So like, let's say with one of my main clients I'm working with now, before we do anything, I go through and I group it all by category. I have different metrics that I'm measuring. It's because I ask myself, all right, what is my goal? What here will make a successful end goal? Then I also ask myself, all right, when I'm starting, I have option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4. And then I mark all those different options. So when I go through, I can find the end result. As you know, previously in our conversation, I brought up the 50, 30, 10% principle, right? You want to first find your top 50%, then you want to go down to 30%. Then when you're done, find the final 10%. And the only way you can do that effectively is through planning and organization. So with my data points, I'll have 4 different options. Remember, we don't want to roll out too many things to start. Then once you have 4 options, you just let it go. And it's like fishing, right? You can try different bait. If you're not getting many fish with your first bait, all right, you're going to toss it out. Then you try your second bait. Then you try your third bait, and then your fourth bait. And then whichever ones get the most bites, all right, that's the bait you want to be using. It's the same exact thing for marketing and for lead generation, right? And so all of that is just to say that you have to have an organized plan. And that's why I love data, is because I know how to go through and set that infrastructure. And then once it's all done, I know how to go through and read it so I can give suggestions on, once again, how to improve your process and not waste time, right?
Yeah, most listeners can't see you and I right now. They're listening to us via just purely audio podcast. But what I really appreciate about during that answer is you had a big smile on your face talking about the fact that you just go with whatever bait is catching. And what I really appreciate about that, Calvron, is a lot of people probably hope that a specific thing works, whereas it just sounds like you straight up don't care. You'll do whatever it is that works and you'll measure it.
Yeah. But with that, the important thing, right, is you have to be strategic about how you apply that bait. Because if you're going in just tossing bait out all the time, eventually the fish are going to be like, all right, something's going on here. This is just too easy, or I don't like this. So it's important to not oversaturate what you're doing by applying everything. It's important to have that healthy medium of, all right, I know what doesn't work, and I know what I don't want to do. So then that way you're not oversaturating the market or scaring away the fish, right? So it's always that happy medium. And in my opinion, that's why you need a professional who can help you with these things, who understands, who's done all the hard work and knows what doesn't work already.
Yeah, for sure. I'll tell you what, as someone who has never fished a day in my life, it's cool to see how these fishing analogies actually make it clear and simple. And that's why I want to go here with you, because I know that it's such a core component of the way that you work, not necessarily the work that you do, but the way you do it is, I already brought it up, is simplicity. I'd love for you to talk to listeners about that, because not only in how you use it, but I think it's beneficial for every single listener who has their own business and who's actively working with clients. Talk to us about the simplicity behind the way that you work with your clients, the way that you communicate it. I'd love to hear some insights there.
Sure. So I actually have one of my favorite stories I've ever heard, and it really shaped the way I view business, the way I view, honestly, life. Is, so let's say 10, 15 years ago, these TV engineers made the perfect remote. It had 50 buttons on it. You could do anything you wanted. You could fast forward, rewind, you could skip to certain things, you could change the volume, you could change the treble, you could change the bass. If you don't know what those two things are, that's part of the problem, right? Is that there is 50 buttons in this remote, and it sold horribly. Nobody wanted to use it. Nobody wanted to buy it. And the engineers just didn't, they didn't understand why. And then I'm going to do a second example to help drive the point home. So like, let's say everyone at home has a Roku remote or an Amazon Fire Stick remote, right? One of the best things about those remotes, I mean, my grandmother has one. I bought her a Roku and she loves it, is because there's 8 buttons on the remote: up, down, left, right, select, mute. And then there might be 3 buttons on the bottom that are like Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney Plus, whatever you want to be using, right? And so the key of a good data engineer, of a good, honestly, a good marketer, a good lead generator, a good developer, is that you make it as easy as possible to use and understand. One of my favorite things to do when I'm talking about different markets is I like to give grades. When I was growing up, I would play sports video games, right? And I would know who the best players were by their overall rating. One number on a scale of 1 to 100, right? And so I do the same thing when it comes to markets, is I like to give an A grade, a B grade, a C grade, a D grade, and an E grade, right? And of course an F as well. And then I'll talk to my client and say, all right, what are 5 or 6 things that you care about a lot? One of them, it might be age in a market, right? For pediatric dentistry, age matters a lot. Or it could be, wage growth, or it could be, a set number of many different things. Then I'll apply that A grade, B grade, C grade, D grade, E grade, and F grade. And so what that does is I can take apart the millions of rows and columns I'm going through, and then I can take the 50 button remote and make them 8 buttons. So, if you want to click the Amazon Prime, or if you want to click the ones that have great age demographics for your range, you can choose the A's, right? If you want to choose ones that fit your wage, right? Some, they want to go after the top spenders, some after the medium spenders, some after the frugal spenders, right? It really just all depends on what you want. And my goal is to take that massive remote into a Roku remote or an Amazon Fire Stick remote.
Yeah, I love that analogy. But Calvron, I have one request of you. Can you please take those principles to the car industry? Because every time I get in a car and I see a million buttons, I drive a Tesla, so I'm spoiled. I have 2 buttons, one for the glove compartment, one for my hazard lights, and everything else is just on the tablet. It's so much simpler. So I love that Roku story because it's something we can all do in our businesses. I think that that's such a good challenge for all of our listeners there. Buttons are not the way. We need to figure out what those proverbial buttons are in our businesses and especially with our clients. So really cool insights from you. I knew that time would fly by with you here today. So many cool concepts that we've never really talked about on the show somehow in over 1,100 episodes. But I'm going to put you on the spot one last time because I love asking this question at the end of every episode. And that is, what's your best piece of advice? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and also taking off just your subject matter expertise hat and also putting on your fellow entrepreneur hat, what's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
Honestly, it really does kind of tie back to what I was talking about with data, in that it's okay to not succeed. It's okay to make mistakes, because when you make those mistakes, that's how you learn. It's like with my data, I cast out a wide net because you figure out what resonates with your audience and what doesn't resonate with your audience. And so it's okay to be patient. It's okay to take your time and to try different methods, because the moment that one sticks, guess what? You found your end, you found your niche, you found your ideal audience, and then you can build from there.
Yes, such good advice. I love the way it ties in with data, with lead generation, with all the things we talked about today, but even on a more macro level, we can extrapolate it and just apply it to business as a whole, to life as a whole. Try things, experiment, measure it, see if it works, double down on the things that work and forget about the things that aren't working. Such important advice. Calvron, it has been a blast having you on the show, and you and I didn't even get to talk about soccer or anything today. I know it's a big part of both of our backgrounds, but for listeners who want to go deeper into all the great work that you're doing, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Great. So I have a LinkedIn both for myself and for my company. And I mean, honestly, beyond that, when it comes to business-wise, that's what I have so far. Maybe in the future, I'll be adding more. But right now, LinkedIn, or of course, my email, which I'm sure will be provided below.
Yes, keeping it simple. I love that. From beginning to end. Listeners, you already know the drill. We're dropping those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Otherwise, Calvron, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.